My name is Genevieve Caldera, and I'm 28 years old. For 3 years of my marriage, my husband watched his mother and sister humiliate me in public. At Thanksgiving dinners, at Christmas brunches, at every Bramwell family gathering, and he never once defended me. Not with a word, not with a look. He would sit beside me at long, polished tables in his mother's dining room and let his family say things about my background, my career, my body, and my childlessness that would have made a stranger uncomfortable. And then he would turn to me on the drive home and ask me to let it go, because that's just how they are. I let it go. For 3 years, I let it go. Until I found a note app on a shared family iPad called Genevieve Concerns, opened by my husband Thatcher, contributed to by his mother Vivian and his sister Margot, containing 47 entries documenting my behavior, twisted versions of normal conversations and ordinary moments, framed as evidence that I was unstable and that the marriage should end. My husband had been collecting evidence against me for 2 years and feeding it to his family while I slept beside him every night. 6 weeks after I found the note app, I stood up at his mother's 60th birthday celebration, held at the very restaurant where I work as the head sommelier, and I gave a toast. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I read from the note app in front of 45 guests, using the calm hospitality voice I had spent 8 years building in fine dining, and I let the words my husband had written about me speak in the room he had let his family humiliate me in. If you've ever been married to a man who would not defend you, if you've ever watched a partner sit silent while his family tore you down and tell you afterward that you were too sensitive, this story is for you. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the worst thing a partner ever let happen to you in front of other people? I want to hear it. Let me take you back. Before the toast. Before the note app. Back to a small kitchen in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where my mother taught me what dignity actually looked like. I grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, a working-class city just north of Providence, where the old textile mills still loom over the river, and the air in summer smells like fried dough from the food trucks at Slater Park. We lived in a third-floor walk-up apartment on Lonsdale Avenue, in a brick building that had been converted from a mill workers' boarding house in the 1920s. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen so narrow you couldn't open the refrigerator and the oven at the same time, and a fire escape outside the living room window, where I used to sit in summer with a book and watch the traffic on the street below. My mother, Esperanza Caldera, was a waitress. She worked at a diner called the Modern Diner on East Avenue in Pawtucket, a real Art Deco diner from 1941, the kind of place that gets featured in food magazines because the booths are original and the coffee is endless. She worked there for 31 years. She started as a 16-year-old hostess and ended as the senior server who trained every new hire and could carry 6 plates without a tray. She could remember the orders of regular customers from 3 months prior. She could read a foretop in 15 seconds and know who needed extra napkins and who needed to be left alone. She raised me by herself. My father had left when I was 3. He moved to Florida with another woman and sent a card on my birthday for the first 2 years and then stopped. I have not seen him since I was 5. I do not have many feelings about him because my mother filled the space he left so completely that I never grew up feeling like anything was missing. She was a single working mother in a small apartment in Pawtucket, and she made our life feel large. My mother believed in 2 things above all others. The first was that hard work had its own dignity, regardless of what anyone else thought of it. The second was that the people who looked down on you for working with your hands were almost always people who would not survive a single shift of the work you did every day. She said both of those things to me regularly in different forms throughout my childhood. They became the foundation of how I understood my own worth. She also loved wine, not in the way wealthy people love wine. She could not afford expensive bottles, and she would have laughed at the idea of paying $90 for something that came in a glass. She loved wine the way working people love things, with curiosity, with humor, and with the practical understanding that a $6 bottle of Spanish Red poured at the end of a 14-hour shift could be one of the best things in life if you drank it with someone you loved. She drank 1 glass of red wine almost every night,
sitting at our small kitchen table after I had gone to bed, looking out the window at the traffic lights on Lonsdale Avenue. When I was 16, I started working at a small Italian restaurant in Providence called Caserta's, bussing tables on weekends. The owner, an older man named Sal Murata, noticed that I asked questions about the wine list, not because I was trying to drink, but because I wanted to understand why certain wines went with certain foods. He started teaching me.
He gave me books to read. He let me sit in on his weekly meetings with the wine distributor. By the time I was 18, I knew more about Italian wine than most adults who had been drinking it for decades. I told my mother I wanted to become a sommelier. She looked at me across our kitchen table, her uniform still on, her hair still pulled back from the diner shift she had just finished, and she said, "Genevieve, that is a beautiful job. You are going to be very good at it. People are going to underestimate you because they will assume you came from money. Let them. The underestimating is their problem. You just keep learning." I just kept learning. I worked through Johnson & Wales University in Providence, getting a degree in hospitality management while working 5 nights a week in restaurants. I took my Court of Master Sommelier's introductory exam at 21 and passed. I took the Certified Sommelier exam at 23 and passed on the first attempt, which is unusual. I was hired at the Atlantic Room, the most prestigious fine dining restaurant in Providence, at 24 as an assistant sommelier. By 26, I was the head sommelier, managing a wine program with over 600 bottles and a budget I had once thought was a typo. The day I passed my certified sommelier exam, my mother gave me a gift. She had been saving for it for almost 2 years. It was a vintage silver wine key, the kind sommeliers use to open bottles tableside. A small folding corkscrew with a silver handle, made in France in the 1960s, with a small engraving on the handle. The engraving was her initials, E.C. Esperanza Caldera. She had paid a jeweler in Pawtucket to add the engraving when she bought the wine key from an estate sale in Newport. "This is for you," she said, handing it to me at our kitchen table. "I know it has my initials on it. I wanted it that way. I want every bottle you open in your life to be opened with something that came from me, even when I am not there, especially when I am not there." I took the wine key. I told her she did not need to give me something so expensive. She told me to be quiet and accept the gift the way she had taught me to accept all gifts, with grace and without arguing about whether I deserved it. I have used that wine key at every restaurant I have worked at since. It lives in the front pocket of my apron. It is the first thing I touch when I start a shift, and the last thing I put away when I leave. It has opened thousands of bottles of wine in my career. And on the night of my mother-in-law's 60th birthday celebration, 3 years into a marriage that was being slowly dismantled behind my back, I held that wine key in my hand while I gave a toast that ended my marriage and saved my life. My mother died of a heart attack when I was 25. It was sudden. She was 49 years old. She had been working a Saturday morning shift at the Modern Diner, and she collapsed in the back kitchen between the pass and the dishwashing station. The owner, a woman named Lila, who had known my mother for 20 years, called 911 and rode with her in the ambulance. My mother was pronounced dead at Memorial Hospital of Rhode Island at 11:47 a.m. I was at the Atlantic Room, prepping for that night's service, when I got the call. The funeral was small, about 60 people, most of them regulars from the diner. Lila gave a eulogy that made me cry for the first time since I had heard the news, because she described my mother the way I had always seen her, as a woman who carried herself with quiet, unmistakable dignity in a job that the world routinely failed to respect. I want to mention my mother's death now, in the first part of this story, because it matters for what comes next. Because 6 months after my mother died, I met Thatcher Bramwell, and because I was 26 years old, grieving the only parent I had ever known, lonely in a way I did not yet have words for, when a quiet, well-dressed corporate attorney walked into the Atlantic Room on a Tuesday evening and asked me about the wine list. I want to be honest, I was vulnerable when I met him. I am not making excuses for the choices I made.
I will own every one of them, but I want you to understand the conditions. I had just lost my mother. I was working 60-hour weeks at a job I loved, but that left me with no social life. I had no extended family in Rhode Island, and Thatcher Bramwell, on that first Tuesday evening, was kind to me in the specific way a careful man can be kind to a tired woman, and I felt seen for the first time in months. He came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. By the fourth week, he was asking for my section every time he came in. By the sixth week, he was asking me to dinner on my night off. I said yes.
I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed in those early weeks that he never talked about his family except in vague terms, and that when I asked about his mother, he changed the subject, and that when I mentioned my mother, he listened politely but did not really engage with the depth of what I was telling him. I should have noticed that the kindness he offered me was reactive, that he was responding to my presence rather than initiating his own care for me, and that the difference between those two things matters more than most people realize when they are falling in love. I noticed none of it. I was 26 and grieving and lonely, and Thatcher Bramwell was 30 and steady and willing to sit across from me at small restaurant tables in Providence and listen to me talk about wine for 2 hours at a time. We were married in 14 months. The wedding was small, about 30 guests on my side, almost all coworkers from the Atlantic Room, and a few of my mother's old friends from the diner, and about 100 guests on his side, almost all family and family friends I had not yet met properly. The first warning sign came at the rehearsal dinner. His mother, Vivian Bramwell, 60 years old at the time, made a toast that began, "We are so happy to welcome Genevieve into our family. It is always a special thing when our son chooses someone who has worked so hard to make her own way in the world." The room laughed politely. I smiled and raised my glass. Thatcher squeezed my hand under the table. I did not understand, in that moment, what the toast had actually said. I would understand by the end of my first year of marriage. By then it would be too late, and the version of myself who could have walked away cleanly would already be gone, replaced by the version who had to fight to walk away at all. The Bramwells were an old Providence family, not Mayflower old, but old enough to have a paid membership at the Hope Club and a family pew at Grace Church and a vacation house in Watch Hill that had been in the family since 1947. Vivian Bramwell had been the wife of a successful estate attorney, Howard Bramwell, who had died of a stroke when Thatcher was 22. After Howard's death, Vivian had reinvented herself as a retired socialite, a phrase she actually used in her own written biography for charity event programs, and had spent the past 9 years organizing fundraisers, sitting on hospital boards, and curating the social life of her 2 adult children with the precision of a woman who had nothing else to manage. Thatcher's older sister, Margot, was 33 when I married into the family. She had never married. She lived in a condo in the east side of Providence that her mother had helped her buy. She had a vague job at a nonprofit foundation that involved attending lunches and writing grant reports, the kind of position that exists in old money networks for daughters who don't quite have careers but need somewhere to be on Tuesdays. Margot was tall, sharp-featured, and possessed of a specific kind of social intelligence that I have come to recognize as a marker of women who have spent their entire lives being told they were the most interesting person in every room and have built their identity around that belief. I want to be fair to both of them. Vivian was not, on the surface, a cruel woman. She was warm with people she considered her own. She remembered birthdays. She brought casseroles to neighbors who were sick. She had a reputation in her social circle as a generous hostess and a loyal friend. Margot was not, on the surface, a malicious sister. She had moments of charm. She could be funny. She had been the maid of honor at the weddings of 3 close friends, and those friends would have told you that Margot Bramwell was a wonderful person. Their cruelty, when it emerged, was almost entirely structural. It was not what they did when they were alone with me. It was what they did when other people were watching, at family gatherings, at dinner parties, at events where their performance of family unity required someone to be positioned slightly below them. I was that someone. From the rehearsal dinner forward,
I was the woman in the room whose presence made the Bramwell women feel more securely Bramwell. The first 6 months of marriage were the calibration period. Vivian and Margot were testing me, figuring out how I responded, what I would tolerate, what made me flinch. The comments started small.
At a family brunch in Vivian's dining room 6 weeks after the wedding, Vivian asked me if my mother had taught me to cook, the way Spanish women cook, with all the spices. I told her my mother had been Puerto Rican, not Spanish, and that yes, she had taught me to cook beautifully. Vivian smiled and said, "Of course, dear. I always confuse those." Margot, sitting across the table, laughed lightly into her napkin. Thatcher said nothing. He passed me the bread basket. A month later, at a charity gala that the Bramwell family attended every year at the Squantum Association in East Providence, I wore a navy cocktail dress I had bought at Nordstrom for the occasion. It was not expensive, but it fit me well, and I felt confident in it. When I walked into the reception with Thatcher, Vivian greeted me with a hug, and then stepped back to look at me and said, in a voice loud enough for the women standing nearby to hear, "Genevieve, what a charming little dress! Did you have it made?" The question was a trap. "Did you have it made" was the kind of question wealthy women asked each other when they wanted to compliment a designer. The expected answer was the name of a tailor or a dressmaker. The implied answer, when asked of someone like me, was that the dress looked homemade. Margot, again, was watching from a few feet away, and I saw her press her lips together to suppress a smile. I said, "It's from Nordstrom." "Oh, lovely," Vivian said. "They have some nice things." Thatcher, beside me, was already looking at his phone. The pattern accelerated over the next year. Vivian and Margot developed a vocabulary of small humiliations, comments about my interesting background, questions about my mother's career in food service, remarks about how brave it was that I had pursued a hospitality career instead of something more substantial. The remarks were always framed as compliments or as friendly curiosity. They were always deniable. If I had ever objected to any of them directly, the response would have been, "Oh, Genevieve, I didn't mean it that way," or, "Don't be so sensitive, dear, we love having you in the family." The thing about deniable cruelty is that it does not feel like cruelty when it is happening. It feels like confusion. It feels like maybe you are imagining it. It feels like maybe the person saying these things really is just being friendly in their own awkward way, and you are being unfair to assume the worst. The accumulation is what reveals the pattern. 20 comments in isolation are nothing. 20 comments over 6 months, all aimed at the same target, all touching the same vulnerabilities: your background, your career, your appearance, your difference from the people in the room. That is a campaign. Thatcher's role in the campaign was the silence. He never participated. He never said the cruel things himself, but he never stopped them either. He never said, "Mom, that's enough." He never said, "Margot, leave her alone." He never reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it in solidarity. He just sat there, eating his food, drinking his wine, scrolling his phone, letting his family say things to me that he would never have allowed anyone to say to his mother or his sister. I tried to talk to him about it the first time. We were driving home from a Sunday brunch at Vivian's house in the 2nd month of our marriage. Vivian had spent most of the brunch describing the wives of Thatcher's college friends, all of whom apparently came from good families and had the right kind of polish, in pointed contrast to me, who was sitting at the same table. "Thatcher, did you notice what your mother was doing during brunch?" "What do you mean?" "The whole conversation about your friends' wives. The good families. She was making sure I understood that I'm not one of them." He sighed, the sigh of a man being asked to address a thing he had hoped would not need addressing. "Genevieve, that's just how she talks. She's from a different generation. She doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. You know what I mean. You're reading into things. My mother loves you. She tells me all the time how much she loves you. I did not say anything else for the rest of the drive. I learned in that conversation 2 things that would shape the next 2.5 years of my marriage. The first was that Thatcher would not defend me.
The second was that any attempt to make him defend me would be reframed as my problem, as my oversensitivity, as my tendency to read into things, as my failure to understand his family's different way of communicating. The most insidious part of this dynamic was how quickly I started doubting myself. I am not a woman who doubts herself easily. I had built a career in a field where confidence and precision are required, and I had built it from a working-class background with no family connections and no safety net. I knew my own worth. I knew my own perception. And yet, after 6 months of marriage, I had started to wonder, in the small hours of the night, whether I really was being too sensitive, whether Vivian really did love me and I was just bad at receiving it, whether the constant low-grade humiliation was actually my fault for not understanding the Bramwell sense of humor. That doubt was the most damaging thing the Bramwells did to me. The comments themselves I could survive. The doubt was what eroded me from the inside. There were moments when I almost broke. There was a Thanksgiving in our second year of marriage when Margot, in front of 14 guests, asked me if Thatcher and I had any baby news yet. And then, when I said no, looked at her mother and said, "I told you, Mom." I bet they're waiting until Thatcher makes partner. Some women are very practical about timing. The implication that I was a calculating woman marrying for money was so transparent that two of the Bramwells' family friends looked at their plates. Thatcher said nothing. He took a sip of wine. There was a Christmas in our third year when Vivian gave everyone in the family expensive gifts: a cashmere coat for Margot, a watch for Thatcher, jewelry for Thatcher's two cousins, and gave me a small wrapped box that turned out to contain a copy of an etiquette book. The Art of Modern Hospitality, a guide for today's gracious hostess. The other gifts in the room had averaged probably $800 each. The book had cost $22. Vivian handed it to me with a warm smile and said, "I thought you might enjoy this, dear. There are some lovely chapters on entertaining." The room had gone briefly quiet. Margot had laughed. Thatcher had not looked up from his own gift. I did not say anything. I thanked Vivian and put the book in my bag. On the drive home, I asked Thatcher why his mother had given me an etiquette book when I had been a professional sommelier and hospitality manager for almost a decade. He told me I was overthinking it. He said his mother probably thought I would find the book interesting because of my career. Thatcher. She gave me a book about how to be a hostess. I host $400 wine pairings for a living. I host private events at one of the best restaurants in New England. I am a professional hostess. Your mother gave me an etiquette book. Genevieve, please. It's Christmas. Can we just have a nice night? I let it go. I always let it go. By the third year of my marriage, let it go had become the central operating principle of my emotional life. I let it go because fighting it would have meant a marriage in constant conflict, and I had been raised by a mother who taught me that working people don't have the luxury of constant conflict. You save your energy for the fights that matter, and you let the small ones pass. The problem was that the Bramwells were running a long campaign of small ones, and a long campaign of small ones, when nothing is ever called what it is, becomes the entire weather of your life. By the third year of my marriage, I was tired in a way I could not name. I was sleeping badly. I was drinking more than I had ever drunk. Not at work, never at work, but at home, on the couch, after Thatcher had fallen asleep. I was losing weight without trying to. I was beginning to dread Sunday mornings because Sunday mornings meant a phone call with Vivian and a discussion of the next family event I would be required to attend. I did not know yet that Thatcher had been documenting all of this in a note on a shared family iPad. I did not know that every time I let it go, every time I sighed at his mother's comments, or excused myself to the bathroom at his sister's brunches, or asked him on the drive home whether I was being too sensitive, he had been writing it down. I did not know that the vocabulary the Bramwell women had been building around me, sensitive, dramatic, unstable, not a good fit for the family, was being recorded, dated, and added to a growing case file that my own husband was building against me with his mother and his sister. I would find out on a Saturday afternoon in March, when Thatcher left a shared iPad on the kitchen counter, and I picked it up to check a recipe. The Saturday in March was unremarkable until it wasn't. Thatcher and I had spent the morning at home in the apartment we rented on Benefit Street, on the east side of Providence. A one-bedroom in a converted Victorian with wide plank floors and tall windows that looked out onto the historic district. He was at the dining table working on a brief for one of his cases. I was making coffee in the kitchen and thinking about a wine pairing menu I needed to finalize for a private event at the Atlantic Room the following weekend.
Thatcher's family iPad was on the kitchen counter beside the toaster. The Bramwells shared a family iPad. Vivian had set it up years before our marriage as a way to share photos, recipes, and family calendar items between herself, Thatcher, and Margot. The iPad was technically Thatcher's, but it synced to a shared family Apple account, and anything saved to it was visible to all three of them. I had used it occasionally during our marriage to look up recipes Vivian had shared, or to find photos from family events. I had never thought of it as private. I picked it up that morning to look up a recipe for a roasted vegetable side dish I was planning to make for dinner. I tapped the Notes app. The Notes app opened to a list of shared notes, organized in folders. I scrolled down the list looking for the recipe folder. As I scrolled, my eye caught a note title that did not belong with the others. The note was titled, Genevieve Concerns. I stopped scrolling. I read the title 3 times. I felt something in my chest go very still. Not panic, not yet. Just the alert quietness of a person whose body has registered a threat before her mind has caught up. I tapped the note. The note opened. It was a long document. I scrolled to the top. The first entry was dated almost 2 years earlier, about 11 months into our marriage. The entry was written in Thatcher's typing style, which I knew from years of texts and emails. Short sentences, no contractions, occasional misspellings he never bothered to fix. The entry read, March 4. Genevieve made a comment at brunch today about Mom's joke about the wedding photos. She said Mom was making fun of her family. Mom was just being sweet. I think Genevieve is reading too much into things again. Mom mentioned this on the phone after. Going to keep an eye on it. Below that entry was another, dated about 3 weeks later, and below that, another, and another. The note contained 47 entries, spaced out over 22 months, each one dated, each one describing some incident in our marriage that had been reframed as evidence of my instability. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I do not remember deciding to sit down. My legs simply stopped holding me up, and I slid down the side of the cabinet until I was on the tile, the iPad in my lap, the coffee maker still gurgling on the counter above me. I read every entry, all 47. It took me about 35 minutes. The entries were horrifying in 2 specific ways. The first was the content, the way ordinary moments of my marriage had been reframed into evidence of pathology. A conversation in which I had asked Thatcher to talk to his mother about a hurtful comment was logged as Genevieve again pushing for confrontation with Mom over imagined slight. A night when I had cried in our bedroom after a particularly cruel Christmas had been logged as Genevieve emotional outburst again. Mom is concerned about her stability. A morning when I had told Thatcher I felt isolated from his family had been logged as Genevieve expressing paranoid thoughts about being excluded, concerning pattern. The second horrifying thing was that the note was shared. Vivian and Margot had access to it, and several entries, about a third of them, had additional comments below Thatcher's main entries, written in different typing styles. Vivian's comments were short and concerned, written in the voice of a worried mother-in-law. We need to talk about this. I'm worried about her. Has she considered seeing someone professionally? Margot's comments were sharper, more clinical. This is escalating. Her family history of single motherhood may be relevant. Has she mentioned medication? My family history of single motherhood. Margot had written that. About my mother. About Esperanza Caldera, who had raised me alone in a third-floor walk-up in Pawtucket on a waitress's tips and had given me a silver wine key with her own initials engraved on it because she wanted every bottle I opened in my life to be opened with something that came from her.
Margot had reduced her, the woman whose dignity had built me, to a clinical risk factor in a private note she shared with my husband. I read the most recent entry last. It was dated 2 weeks before that Saturday morning. It was the longest entry in the note. It was written by Thatcher, with comments below from both Vivian and Margot. Thatcher's entry read, February 18th. I had a long conversation with Mom last night about Genevieve. Mom thinks the marriage isn't going to work and wants me to start thinking about an exit. She says Genevieve has gotten worse over the past year and that the family events are becoming impossible. I told her I love Genevieve, but I see what she means.
Genevieve has been more distant. She drinks more at home than she used to. She has stopped trying to connect with the family. I don't know what to do. Mom says I need to start documenting the worst of it in case I need to make a case for separation. I'm going to start being more careful about what I write down here. Vivian's comment below. Sweetheart, you are doing the right thing. Marriages end. Some of them are mistakes. Yours doesn't have to be the rest of your life. We are here for you no matter what. Margot and I love you. Margot's comment below. Thatch, I have been telling you this for a year. She is not one of us. She was never going to be. The sooner you accept this, the better. I love you. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time after I finished reading. I do not know how long. The coffee maker had stopped gurgling. The light through the kitchen window had shifted slightly. At some point, Thatcher walked into the kitchen to refill his coffee mug. He saw me on the floor. He saw the iPad in my lap. His face changed in 3 stages. The first stage was confusion. The second stage was recognition, the moment he understood what I was holding and what I had been reading. The third stage was the careful, controlled blankness of a man who has been caught and is calculating his options in real time. Genevieve, what are you doing? I looked up at him from the floor. I was not crying. I was not shouting. I was in the strange, glassy calm that comes when something has finally been confirmed after months of doubt. I was looking for a recipe. That note is private. You shouldn't have opened it. It is on a shared family iPad, Thatcher. The note is shared with your mother and your sister. I did not know I was excluded from a document about myself that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law have been editing for 2 years. Genevieve, I can explain. You have been documenting me. You and your mother and your sister have been building a case file against me for 2 years, while I was sleeping next to you, while I was hosting your family at our table, while I was making your mother's favorite cassoulet on her birthday because I wanted her to like me. That's not what it is. Mom suggested I write things down because she was worried. Your mother suggested you write things down so that when the time came to leave me, you would have a record of my behavior that she had helped you build. Your mother and your sister have been turning me into a clinical case in a notes app for 2 years, and you have been letting them. You have been participating in it. He did not respond. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee mug in his hand, and he could not look at me, and the silence stretched until it became its own kind of confession. I stood up from the floor. My legs had gone numb from sitting on the tile. I steadied myself against the counter. I put the iPad on the counter beside the coffee maker. I walked past Thatcher into our bedroom. I pulled out the small leather bag I used for overnight trips. I packed enough clothes for a week. I packed the silver wine key, the wine key that lived in the front pocket of my work apron during the week and on my dresser at home on weekends. I picked it up off the dresser and held it in my palm for a moment, and the small weight of it in my hand was the first thing that had felt real to me since I had opened the note. I walked back through the apartment. Thatcher was still in the kitchen. Where are you going? I am going to stay with someone. Genevieve, please, let's talk about this. I can explain the context. There is no context, Thatcher. There is no version of those 47 entries that becomes acceptable when I hear the context. You documented me for your mother. You did not defend me at a single dinner in 3 years, and then you went home and wrote down the moments when I asked you to defend me as evidence of my instability. There is nothing left to talk about tonight. I walked out of the apartment on Benefit Street with the leather bag over my shoulder and the silver wine key in the front pocket of my jeans. I walked down to the sidewalk. I stood on Benefit Street under the bare March trees, and I called the only person I could think of who would understand what had just happened to me. Cosima Russo answered on the second ring. Cosima Russo lived in a third-floor apartment on Wickenden Street, 10 minutes from my apartment by car. She had been the executive chef at the Atlantic Room for 9 years, longer than I had been there. She was 47 years old, sharp-tongued, with close-cropped silver hair and the calm authority of a woman who had run hot kitchens for 25 years and had stopped tolerating nonsense from anyone, including her own staff, when she turned 35. I had worked with Cosima for 4 years. We had a professional rapport that had slowly become a friendship, the kind of friendship that exists between two women in fine dining who recognize each other as serious about the work. We did not socialize outside the restaurant much. We had each other's phone numbers for emergencies. This was an emergency. She told me to come straight to her apartment. When I arrived 20 minutes later with my leather bag, she opened the door without saying hello and pulled me inside and pointed me toward her kitchen table. She put a kettle on. She did not ask what had happened. She let me sit. After about 3 minutes, when the kettle whistled, she made 2 cups of strong English breakfast tea and sat down across from me and said, "Now." I told her everything in about 30 minutes. The Bramwells, the 3 years of comments, Thatcher's silence, the shared iPad, the note app, the 47 entries. The most recent entry where Vivian had told Thatcher to start documenting the worst so he could make a case for separation. I told her about the comment Margot had written about my mother. I told her about the silver wine key in my pocket. Cosima listened without interrupting. When I finished, she did not offer sympathy. She said one sentence. "I left a marriage like this 12 years ago, Genevieve, and the only thing I regret is not doing it in public." I looked at her. "You were married?" "For 12 years, to a man whose mother treated me like household staff at every family gathering for a decade." The breaking point for me was a Christmas dinner where his mother actually asked me to clear the plates while the rest of the family sat at the table. I cleared the plates, Genevieve. I am the executive chef at one of the best restaurants in New England, and I cleared the plates of 14 people because I had spent 12 years being trained by my husband's silence to swallow every humiliation his family could think of. I did the dishes, I drove home, and I filed for divorce on a Monday morning. The whole thing ended quietly, with lawyers, the way these things usually end. And for 12 years I have wished, just once, that I had said something out loud in a room where his family had to hear it. The quiet ending protects them. It protects the people who hurt you. They get to keep their reputations intact, and you get to limp away with your scars, and they tell themselves, in the years that follow, that the marriage just didn't work out, that there was no villain, no specific cruelty, just 2 people who weren't meant to be together. I let them have that lie for 12 years, and I am still angry about it. She took a sip of her tea. "You have an opportunity I did not have. You found the document. You have the evidence in their own words. And by an absolutely improbable coincidence, your mother-in-law is having her 60th birthday celebration in 6 weeks at the very restaurant where you and I work. She booked the private dining room 2 months ago. I have the reservation in my system. She specifically requested that you handle the wine service as her gift from her daughter-in-law. 45 guests, Bramwell family and friends. All of the people who watched her humiliate you for 3 years and never said anything will be in that room." I had forgotten about the booking, or I had been trying to forget. Vivian had announced it to me on a Sunday phone call about a month earlier, the casual announcement of a woman who had not asked, who had simply informed me that I would be hosting the wine service at her birthday party at my own workplace, as her gift, and that I would be doing it without compensation because it was such a sweet thing for family to do for family. I was going to do it, Cosima. I know you were. I was going to watch you do it, and I was going to be furious about it. But Genevieve, the booking is still in the system. Vivian Bramwell has not canceled. The party is in 6 weeks. You are still the head sommelier. You are still the person scheduled to handle the wine service.
And the toasting portion of the evening is on the printed agenda Vivian sent us last week. There will be a microphone. There will be an open invitation for family members to share words about Vivian on her 60th birthday.
She paused. She looked at me directly. You can decline the booking. I will support you. I will tell Vivian there has been a scheduling conflict and we will refund her deposit and the party will not happen at our restaurant. That is one option. The other option is that you host the wine service the way she asked you to, and you select the wines yourself. And when the toasting portion begins, you take the microphone and you say what needs to be said in the room where it needs to be said. You will have the floor. You will have the audience. You will have the calm professional voice you have spent 8 years building. And you will have the truth, in their own words, sitting in your phone. I held the cup of tea in both hands. I thought about my mother. I thought about the silver wine key in my pocket. I thought about Esperanza Caldera at our small kitchen table in Pawtucket, telling me that the people who looked down on you for working with your hands were almost always people who would not survive a single shift of the work you did every day. I want to do it the second way. I thought you would. Now let me tell you what I'm going to do because you are not doing this alone. Cosima's plan was operational. She had spent 25 years in kitchens, and she planned things the way she planned a service, with timing, with backups, with contingencies for every variable. I would stay at her apartment for the 6 weeks leading up to the birthday celebration. She had a small guest room she was not using. I would not return to the apartment on Benefit Street. Thatcher would not know where I was unless I chose to tell him. He had texted me 11 times since I left, ranging from apologies to demands that I come home to talk. I did not respond to any of them. Cosima told me not to. Silence is your friend right now. Every day you do not respond is a day he and his mother and his sister cannot recalibrate their story. I would continue working at the Atlantic Room as if nothing had happened. I would handle my normal shifts. I would not discuss the situation with any other coworkers. The fewer people who knew, the better, both for my own protection and for the integrity of what was about to happen at the birthday celebration. I would screenshot every entry in the Genevieve Concerns note before Thatcher had a chance to delete it. Cosima told me to do this immediately, that night, from her apartment. I logged into the shared Apple account from my phone, the account I still had access to, and I opened the Notes app and I screenshot all 47 entries with their dates and their comments. I emailed the screenshots to a private email address I had used since college. I saved them in 3 separate folders. I told Cosima when I was finished. She nodded. He will delete the note within a week, probably within 48 hours. He is not stupid. He will realize that you have it now, and he will delete it from the shared account, hoping that solves the problem. It won't, because you have the screenshots. But the deletion will give you something else. Proof that he knew the note was incriminating. People do not delete things they believe are innocent. Thatcher deleted the note 31 hours later. I knew because I checked. The Genevieve Concerns entry was gone from the notes folder on the shared iPad. The screenshots in my private email were now the only record that the note had ever existed. They were also the only record I needed. I would prepare a toast. Not write it word for word. Cosima told me that prepared toasts always sounded prepared, and that what I needed was to know my key beats and trust my professional voice to carry me through the rest. I would speak the way I spoke at wine pairing dinners. Calm, specific, hospitable. I would use the language of my profession, the language of reading a room, of identifying notes that are hidden in plain sight, of hospitality as a discipline. I would let the audience understand by listening rather than by being told. And I would quote directly from the entries I had screenshot, in the voices of the people who had written them. I would carry the silver wine key in my hand the entire time. The party was in 6 weeks. I had work to do. Vivian Bramwell's 60th birthday celebration was held on a Saturday evening in early May at the Atlantic Room. The private dining room, known internally as the Harborside Room because the windows looked out onto the lights of the Providence River, was the largest of our 3 private spaces, seating 46 guests at a long, single table the staff had configured along the windows. The room had exposed brick walls, low pendant lighting, hardwood floors,
and the kind of acoustic warmth that made every conversation feel intimate, even when the room was full. Vivian had chosen the room 6 weeks earlier, before she knew anything about the document her son had been writing about me. She had selected the menu personally with our executive chef, Cosima Russo. She had requested a custom cake from a bakery in Federal Hill. She had instructed the front-of-house manager that her daughter-in-law, me, would be handling the wine service personally as a gift from the family. She had paid the deposit, signed the contract, and submitted the guest list. The party was a Bramwell family event in every sense, hosted at my workplace, with me cast in the role of wine-pouring daughter-in-law. I had spent the 6 weeks between discovering the note and the night of the party doing 2 things. The first was working my normal shifts at the Atlantic Room. The second was preparing. I had not contacted Thatcher. He had texted me 43 times in those 6 weeks, in waves. Apologies, demands, threats to involve a lawyer, gentler attempts at reconciliation, and finally a long message in week 4 that read, "Genevieve, I know you are angry. I know I have failed you. Please come home so we can talk about this in person. The party is in 2 weeks and my mother is expecting you. Please, we can figure this out."
I had not responded. Cosima had read the message over my shoulder and said, "He is more worried about the party than about you. Note that for later." Vivian had called me twice. The first call was a check-in about wine selections. The second was a chirpy reminder that, "We are so excited to have you handling everything for us, dear." Both times I had answered briefly, professionally, without volunteering anything about my marriage. Vivian did not seem to know that Thatcher and I had been separated for 6 weeks. Either Thatcher had not told her, or she had decided to ignore it and behave as if everything were normal. I had selected the wines for the party with care. 3 whites, 4 reds, a sparkling for the toast, and a dessert wine for the cake. I had chosen each bottle deliberately, the way a sommelier always chooses bottles for an important event, but I had also chosen them with a secondary purpose in mind that I had not discussed with Cosima or with anyone. I had chosen the wines as a quiet language, as a small subtext that I would carry into the room with me regardless of what else happened. The toasting bottle, the sparkling that would be poured for the formal toast portion of the evening, was a cava from a small producer in the Penedès region of Spain. Spain. I had thought, when I selected it, of Vivian's comment 3 years earlier at brunch about my mother teaching me to cook the way Spanish women cook. Vivian had not known the difference between Puerto Rican and Spanish then, and she did not know now. She would not recognize the cava as anything other than a sparkling wine. But I would know, and the bottle would be in my hands when I gave my toast. I arrived at the restaurant at 4 p.m. on the Saturday of the party, 3 hours before guests would arrive. I went directly to the wine cellar to pull the bottles I had selected and bring them up to the harborside room for proper storage and decanting. Cosima was already in the kitchen prepping for service. She caught my eye as I passed the kitchen pass and gave me a small nod. We had not discussed the toast in detail since the 2nd week of planning. There was nothing more to discuss. I was wearing my standard sommelier attire, a fitted black suit jacket over black slacks, a white-collared shirt, and a small black tie. The silver wine key was in the front pocket of my jacket, where it always was during service. I had pulled my hair back into a low knot. I looked like myself on any other working night. I looked like the head sommelier of the Atlantic Room. That was the point. The harborside room was set up by 5:30. Long single table along the windows, set for 46. White linens, crystal stemware, fresh peonies in low arrangements every 4 feet. The soft yellow lighting from the pendant fixtures above. A small podium with a wireless microphone had been set up at the head of the table for the toasting portion of the evening. A gift table near the entrance held an arrangement of presents from guests. The custom cake from the Federal Hill Bakery, a 4-tier ivory cake with sugar peonies that matched the table arrangements, sat on a separate display table near the windows. The first guests arrived at 6:45. By 7:15, the room was full. 46 people, mostly Bramwell family and their longtime social circle. Vivian arrived at 7:20 in a champagne-colored silk dress with pearl earrings and her hair freshly set, accompanied by Margot and Thatcher. Thatcher saw me first. He was standing near the entrance to the harborside room with a glass of water in his hand, talking to one of his cousins, when I walked in carrying a wine bottle to set up at the head of the table. He froze. He had not seen me in 6 weeks. He had not known whether I would actually show up tonight. The expression on his face moved through 3 stages: relief, then confusion, then a careful blankness as he realized I was wearing my work clothes and operating in my professional capacity rather than in any role he could place. Vivian spotted me a moment later. She had not seen me in 6 weeks either, but unlike Thatcher, she had been operating under the assumption that I would simply be at the party as both daughter-in-law and sommelier. She approached me with both arms open, the warm, welcoming smile she always wore in public, and said, "Genevieve, sweetheart, look at you. Such a professional. Thank you for doing this for me tonight. It means so much." I let her hug me. I did not return the hug with any warmth. I held my arms loosely at my sides and let her press against me for the half second the social ritual required, and then I stepped back. I said, "Happy birthday, Vivian." She did not seem to notice the lack of warmth, or if she noticed, she chose not to engage with it. She turned to greet other guests. Margot approached me a moment later. She did not hug me. She gave me a quick once-over with her eyes, taking in my work clothes, my pulled-back hair, my professional posture, and said, "Well, you look the part tonight. Good for you." "Thank you, Margot." She moved on. I went back to the head of the table and began the wine service. I poured the first glasses of the evening. I described each wine to the guests at the head of the table in the way I would describe wines at any other private event: the producer, the region, the tasting notes, the food pairing rationale. The guests near the head of the table listened politely. They did not ask questions. I was performing the role of wine-pouring daughter-in-law, exactly as Vivian had requested. Nothing in my behavior gave anything away. Dinner was served at 7:45. Cosima had prepared a 5-course menu: a chilled spring pea soup, a beet and goat cheese salad, a pan-seared halibut with citrus beurre blanc, a duck breast with cherry reduction, and a panna cotta with the cake to follow. The service was flawless. The kitchen ran on time. I poured wine pairings between each course, moving quietly around the long table, refilling glasses, answering occasional questions from guests who wanted to know more about the selections. I did my job. I kept my face neutral. I waited. The toasting portion of the evening was scheduled for 9:15, after the duck course had been cleared and before the cake was served. At 9:12, Cosima caught my eye from the doorway of the harborside room. She gave me a single nod. The kitchen was holding the dessert service until the toasts were complete. The microphone was ready. At 9:15, the front-of-house manager, a man named Dario, who had been at the restaurant longer than I had, stepped to the small podium at the head of the table and tapped the microphone twice. "Good evening, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your meal at the Atlantic Room. We will be serving the cake and dessert wine momentarily. But first, the family has asked for a few minutes to share toasts and well wishes for the woman of the hour. If anyone would like to say a few words about Vivian on this beautiful evening, please come up to the microphone. I'll start by inviting Vivian's son, Thatcher, to say a few words." Polite applause. Thatcher stood up from his seat near the head of the table. He walked to the microphone. He gave the toast he had clearly been preparing for weeks, a sentimental, well-rehearsed speech about his mother's strength after his father's death, about the way she had held the family together, about the woman he had been lucky enough to call Mom for 31 years. He was a corporate attorney. He knew how to give a public speech. The toast was polished, warm, and well-received. Vivian dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Margot nodded approvingly from her seat. Several of Vivian's friends raised their glasses. When Thatcher finished, the room applauded. He stepped away from the microphone and returned to his seat. I was standing near the head of the table with a bottle of the Spanish cava in my hands.
waiting for the moment Dario would invite me to pour the toasting wine. I had been preparing all day for what was about to happen, and I had been preparing for 6 weeks before that, and I had been preparing, in some quieter way, for 3 years. Dario looked at me.
I gave him a small nod. He turned back to the microphone.
And before we serve the toast and wine, Vivian's daughter-in-law, Genevieve, has asked if she could say a few words. Genevieve is also our head sommelier here at the Atlantic Room and has been so generous with her time tonight. Genevieve?
There was a small ripple of attention through the room. This was unscripted. Vivian had not known I would be speaking. Margot looked sharply at Thatcher. Thatcher's face had gone slightly pale. I set the cava bottle on the small table beside the podium. I walked to the microphone. I took it in both hands. I looked out at the room. I had a clear view of the long table. 46 faces. Vivian at the head, in her champagne silk dress, smiling expectantly. Margot a few seats down, watching me with the slightly narrowed expression of a woman who had not been told what was about to happen and did not like surprises. Thatcher across the table, his jaw tight, his hands folded in his lap.
Beyond them, the Bramwell family friends, the cousins, the longtime social acquaintances, the whole architecture of the world Vivian Bramwell had spent 60 years building. The silver wine key was in the front pocket of my jacket. I touched it briefly through the fabric. Thank you, Dario. And thank you all for having me here tonight. As Dario mentioned, I'm the head sommelier at the Atlantic Room. I am also Vivian Bramwell's daughter-in-law, which has been the role I have played at every Bramwell family event for the past 3 years. Tonight is the first time those two roles have been performed in the same room. A small polite laugh from the guests who did not yet know what was about to happen. I want to talk about what a sommelier actually does. People assume sommeliers know about wine. That is true, but it is the smallest part of the job. The biggest part of the job is reading rooms. A sommelier walks into a private dining room and reads 46 people in the first 90 seconds. Who is celebrating? Who is enduring? Who is performing? Who is being humiliated and pretending not to be? We read the table the way other professionals read documents. The signals are everywhere. They are in the body language, in the silences, in the moments when one person at the table laughs at a joke that was at someone else's expense, and the someone else looks down at their plate and pretends not to have heard it. A good sommelier sees all of it. A great sommelier sees all of it and never lets on. The room was quiet now. The polite social attention had sharpened into something more focused. Vivian's smile was still in place, but it had shifted slightly, the smile of a woman who was beginning to sense that something was happening that she had not approved. For 3 years, I've been the daughter-in-law at the Bramwell family table, and for 3 years, I have also been the sommelier at the Bramwell family table, even when no wine was being served. I have been reading the room. I have been seeing all of it. I have been hearing every comment that was made at my expense and pretending not to have heard it, the way a professional sommelier pretends not to hear the things that aren't meant to be heard. I want to thank the Bramwell family for the long professional training. I am better at my job because of you. A few of the guests began to look uncomfortable. Margot's wine glass had stopped halfway to her mouth. Thatcher was staring at the table. I want to read something to you tonight, something I found 6 weeks ago on a shared family iPad in the apartment my husband and I share on Benefit Street. It is a note in the Notes app that my husband, Thatcher, has been keeping for 2 years. The note is titled Genevieve Concerns. It contains 47 entries. The note was shared with my mother-in-law, Vivian Bramwell, and my sister-in-law, Margot Bramwell. Both of them have contributed to it. I am going to read 3 short entries from the note. I want you to listen the way a sommelier listens, for what is in the words and for what is in the spaces between them. I took my phone out of the inside pocket of my jacket. I opened the email folder where I had saved the screenshots 6 weeks earlier. I selected the 3 entries I had chosen. The first entry is dated November of last year. It was written by my husband, Thatcher. It says,
Genevieve cried in the bedroom after Thanksgiving today. Said Mom was being mean to her about not having kids yet. I told her she was overreacting. Mom is just being Mom. Genevieve is too sensitive about this stuff. Mom is concerned about her stability, going to keep tracking it. I looked up. I scanned the room. Vivian's hand had gone to her pearl necklace. Margot had set her wine glass down completely.
The second entry is dated January of this year. It was written by my sister-in-law, Margot, as a comment under one of Thatcher's entries. It says, "Thatch, I have been telling you this for a year. She is not one of us. She was never going to be. Her family history of single motherhood may be relevant to her instability. The sooner you accept this, the better. I love you." The room had gone fully silent, the kind of silence that has no shape, the kind that means everyone in it is collectively aware that something is unfolding that cannot be undone. A woman seated about 6 chairs down from Vivian, I recognized her as Eleanor Whitfield, one of Vivian's closest friends from the Hope Club, set her napkin on the table beside her plate and turned in her seat to look directly at Vivian. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had known her friend for 30 years and was rapidly recalculating that friendship in real time. The third entry is dated 3 weeks before I found the note. It was written by my mother-in-law, Vivian Bramwell, as a comment under one of Thatcher's entries. It says, "Sweetheart, you are doing the right thing. Marriages end. Some of them are mistakes. Yours doesn't have to be the rest of your life. We are here for you no matter what. Margot and I love you." I lowered the phone. I set it gently on the podium beside the microphone. I am the daughter of a waitress. My mother's name was Esperanza Caldera. She raised me alone in a third-floor walk-up in Pawtucket on a waitress's tips. She worked at the Modern Diner on East Avenue for 31 years. She died of a heart attack at 49. The day I passed my certified sommelier exam, she gave me a gift. She had been saving for almost 2 years to afford it. It is a vintage silver wine key. It has her initials engraved on the handle, EC, for Esperanza Caldera. She gave it to me because she wanted every bottle I opened in my life to be opened with something that came from her, especially when she was no longer here. I reached into the front pocket of my jacket. I took out the silver wine key. I held it up so the room could see. This is the wine key. This is what my mother gave me. This is the family history of single motherhood that my sister-in-law described in writing as a clinical risk factor for my instability. I held the wine key for a long moment. The silver caught the soft yellow light from the pendant fixtures above. The engraving on the handle was visible to the guests at the head of the table. Eleanor Whitfield was crying silently, her napkin pressed to her mouth. I am not going to give a toast to Vivian Bramwell tonight. I am going to give a toast to my mother. Esperanza Caldera taught me that the people who look down on you for working with your hands are almost always the people who would not survive a single shift of the work you do every day. She was right. I have spent 3 years performing hospitality for a family that was documenting me as evidence of my own instability. I will not be performing hospitality for them anymore. I will be performing it for the people who deserve it. For the guests who walk into this restaurant without an agenda, for the colleagues who have stood beside me, for the woman whose initials are on this wine key. I raised the wine key slightly higher. To Esperanza Caldera, the best hostess I have ever known. The room did not respond. The silence held. Thatcher stood up suddenly. Genevieve, please. This is not the place for— Sit down, Thatcher, I said, quietly, into the microphone. This is exactly the place for this. You let your family humiliate me in this kind of place for 3 years. The least you can do is let me speak in one. He stood there for a moment, then sat down. His face was the color of the linen tablecloth. I picked up the bottle of Spanish cava from the small table beside the podium. I held it up. I used the silver wine key to open it, slowly, deliberately, the way I would have opened it at any tableside service. The cork came out cleanly. I poured a single glass for myself from the bottle. I raised the glass. To my mother. I drank. I set the glass down. I picked up my phone from the podium.
I walked away from the microphone and out of the harborside room without looking at Vivian, without looking at Margot, without looking at Thatcher. Cosima was waiting for me at the kitchen pass. She handed me my coat. I put it on. I walked out of the Atlantic room into the cool May night on the Providence River, with the silver wine key still in my hand. I filed for divorce the following Tuesday.
My attorney was a woman named Adelaide Coltrane, recommended by Cosima, a divorce lawyer who specialized in cases where one spouse had been documented and gaslit by the other. Adelaide reviewed the screenshots of the Genevieve Concerns note in her office on Westminster Street and looked up at me and said, "Genevieve, this is the cleanest evidence of intentional emotional harm I have seen in my career. You are not going to have a difficult divorce. You are going to have a fast one." She was right. Thatcher's attorney called Adelaide within 48 hours of the filing and signaled willingness to settle quickly. Thatcher knew that the screenshots existed. He knew that Vivian and Margot's comments existed in writing. He knew that the entire architecture of the campaign his family had run against me was documented in their own words, and that any contested divorce would mean those documents being entered into court records and becoming part of a public proceeding.
He wanted the divorce to disappear quietly. So did Vivian. So did Margot. The Bramwells did not want their names attached to 47 entries of documented cruelty in any forum where their friends might read them. The settlement was negotiated in 3 weeks. I kept the apartment on Benefit Street. I did not want it, but Adelaide insisted, and we sold it within 2 months and split the proceeds. I received a financial settlement that was generous enough to make Thatcher's attorney visibly uncomfortable when it was finalized. I kept the silver wine key, which had never been a question. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks after the night of the toast. I did not see Thatcher in person again after the night of the celebration. Our entire divorce was conducted through attorneys.
He sent me one letter, handwritten, 4 pages, full of the kind of late apologies that men send when they have lost everything and are trying to recover some sense of their own dignity by performing remorse on paper. The letter said he was sorry. The letter said he had been weak. The letter said his mother had manipulated him into the documentation and that he had not understood at the time what he was participating in. The letter said he hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive him someday. I read the letter once. I put it in a folder on my desk. I did not respond. The thing I noticed about Thatcher's apology, and I want to mention this because it matters, was that even in the apology, he could not take full responsibility. He had been manipulated. He had not understood. His mother had led him.
The apology was structured the same way the marriage had been structured, with Thatcher as the passive recipient of his family's actions, the man to whom things happened, the man who never quite chose anything. The apology was written by the same man who had let his family humiliate me for 3 years and then written it down for them as evidence. He had not changed. He had only been caught. Vivian Bramwell did not contact me. Margot Bramwell did not contact me. The Bramwell family circled the wagons after the night of the celebration, the way old families always do when one of their own is exposed. They told their friends a version of the story in which the marriage had simply not worked out, in which Genevieve had been going through some things, in which the unfortunate outburst at the birthday party had been a sad sign of mental instability that the family had been worried about for some time. The story was an exact mirror of the story they had been writing in the note app. They did not learn from being exposed. They simply incorporated the exposure into the existing narrative. But I learned later, from Cosima, that the story did not hold for everyone. Eleanor Whitfield, the woman who had sat near Vivian at the birthday celebration and had cried into her napkin during my toast, quietly resigned from a charity board she had served on with Vivian for 15 years. She did not give a public reason. She just stopped attending. 2 other women in Vivian's social circle distanced themselves more gradually. Vivian still had her friends, her clubs, her position, but there were now small holes in the architecture, and the holes were the places where I had been visible to people who had quietly recalculated. Margot's life did not change visibly. She still lives in her condo on the east side. She still attends lunches. She still has her vague nonprofit job.
But I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that she has stopped mentioning me as her sister-in-law and now refers to Thatcher's first marriage, as if it were a brief mistake from another era. I am, in her telling, no longer a person. I am a chapter that ended. That is fine. I would rather be a chapter that ended than a person she was still actively documenting. I was promoted to wine director at the Atlantic Room 2 months after the night of the celebration. The promotion had been in discussion before the events of the spring, but Linwood Garrick— wait, wrong story. The owner of the Atlantic Room, a woman named Phoebe Sinclair, called me into her office on a Wednesday morning in July and offered me the position. The promotion came with a significant raise and full authority over the wine program. Every bottle, every list, every selection, every relationship with our distributors. It was the role I had been working toward for 8 years. I accepted. I signed the new contract that afternoon. Cosima Russo stopped by my office later that day with a bottle of inexpensive Spanish red wine, the kind my mother used to drink at our kitchen table in Pawtucket. She set the bottle on my desk and said, "I picked this because I know your mother would have approved of the price." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Real laughter, the kind that surprised me when it came out. We opened the bottle in my office that evening after service. I used the silver wine key. We drank from the small, everyday glasses I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. Cosima told me a story about her own first promotion to executive chef 12 years earlier, in the months after her divorce, and how the promotion had felt like the universe giving her back something she had been forced to give up. I listened. I understood. We have continued to drink inexpensive wine together about once a month since then. The friendship has become one of the steadiest things in my life. I moved into my own apartment in September, a one-bedroom on Wickenden Street, 3 blocks from Cosima's place. The apartment has a small kitchen with windows that look out onto the street, hardwood floors, and a tiny balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a small table. I bought the chairs and the table from a thrift store on Hope Street. I bought a plant for the balcony. I made the apartment mine in the slow, careful way I make everything mine. One decision at a time, no rushing, no input from anyone else. The silver wine key sits in a small wooden display box on the bookshelf in the living room. I keep it there when I am not wearing it for work. It is the most valuable object I own, in every sense of the word. On my first night in the new apartment, the night I had finished unpacking the last box and the furniture was finally where I wanted it, I opened a bottle of cheap Spanish red wine and poured myself a glass. I sat at my small kitchen table. I looked out the window at the streetlights on Wickenden. I raised my glass. "To you, Mom," I said, out loud, to the empty apartment. I drank the glass slowly. I thought about my mother at our kitchen table in Pawtucket, drinking her own glass of cheap red wine after a 14-hour shift, looking out at the traffic on Lonsdale Avenue. I thought about the dignity she had carried into rooms that had not deserved her. I thought about the silver wine key she had saved up for 2 years to buy me. I thought about the version of myself that had existed before the Bramwells and the version of myself that existed now. 3 years later, scarred but standing, with the wine key in my hand and my own apartment around me, and a job I had earned with my own work. The 2 versions of myself were closer together than I would have expected. The Bramwells had not changed the core of me. They had only made me forget it for a while. If you've ever been married to someone who would not defend you, if you've ever been documented by the people who were supposed to love you, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that the documentation almost always exists somewhere. People who hurt you in careful, deniable ways tend to keep records of their cruelty because they need the records to maintain the lie even to themselves. Find the records if you can. Save them. Let them speak for you when you are ready. The second thing is that the toast you have not yet given is still waiting for you. You do not need a wedding or a birthday or a 60th celebration to give it. You can give it in your own kitchen, alone, with a cheap bottle of wine and a glass and the people you love most held in your memory. The toast is not about the people who hurt you. The toast is about the people who built you. Lift the glass, say the name. Let the room, even if the room is just you, hear it out loud.
My name is Genevieve Caldera. My mother's name was Esperanza. I am the head sommelier at the Atlantic Room in Providence, Rhode Island. I open every bottle of wine in my professional life with a silver wine key that has my mother's initials on it. And the people who tried to make me feel like I did not belong in the rooms I worked in, they were wrong. The rooms were always mine.
I just had to learn to stop asking permission to be in them. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you have your own toast you have been waiting to give, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know whose name you would say. I want to know what you would lift the glass for.